2022. Happy St. Patrick's Day, everyone. Mayor Ann is probably going to fill us in on the activities that started early this morning when it's time for her to give her update. But just want to say it's good to see you. It's been a while, and we have a full agenda. I also want to mention that we will seek to take a break at a strategic time so that folks can relieve themselves if they need to, or receive a little comfort if they need to. We have a very long meeting. I recognize that it might be challenging for some, and so I just wanted to let you know that we're planning to program in some time for you to step away should you need to, so that you won't miss anything. So with that, we'll dig right in and get started. First, I'll need to read a few instructions for folks who are joining. We will be providing closed captions. Closed captions are provided in English and in Spanish. English closed captions are available within excuse me, let me start again. Closed captions in English and Spanish are available. English closed captions are available within Zoom and YouTube. Users can follow this link to view both English and Spanish captions in a separate browser window, and that's at https://ibr.news/captions. Next slide. How to access closed captions. At the bottom middle of your screen, you should see a menu of options. If you can't see the menu, hover your mouse over the bottom middle of the screen. Click on the CC icon and a separate window with captions will appear. Webinar participation tips. We'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. We encourage panelists to turn on your videos. We ask that you keep your audio on mute when you're not speaking. And before speaking, we ask that you state your name and affiliation to help attendees identify who is talking. If you experience technical difficulties, please contact program staff at 360-329-6744. Next slide, please. Public input instructions. There will be an opportunity to provide brief public input later in the meeting today. To submit input after the meeting, you can email your comments to info@interstatebridge.org with ESG Public Comment in the subject line, or you can call 888-503-6735 and state ESG Public Comment in your message. Meeting ground rules. We ask that everyone honor the agenda, that you listen to understand and ask questions to clarify, that we take an approach that allows us to be hard on problems and soft on the people. We hope to address interests and seek common ground. And we want to make sure that we're providing a balance of speaking time. Next slide. So our meeting agenda is as follows. From 10 to 10:30, we're going to have our welcome. We'll do the introductions as we always do. We'll do the agenda review, which you're doing right now, and we'll have updates. The next item will be the LPA decision-making process. Then we'll have the transit overview, community advisory group update, technical overview, climate program overview, and then public comment. And we'll close the meeting with confirming the upcoming meeting topics, next steps, and summary. And so now we are going to move into the portion of our agenda that allows you, our ESG members, to speak. If you could advance to the next slide. So I'm going to ask that our program administrator, Greg Johnson, provide us with a few opening comments, and then we'll go around the table and ask that each of our program partners provide your regional updates and overviews of things that have been going on. And then we'll move into a series of presentations in this portion of the agenda that will help to support us moving forward. I see your hand, Secretary Millar.
Yeah, thank you. I was just hoping you could unshare your screen so we could see people as we
Sure.
get to this next element. Thank you.
All right. So while we're pushing those buttons, I'm going to ask that Administrator Johnson open up the meeting officially.
Well, good morning and welcome everybody. Once again, and you've heard this from me for the last year, the team has been working extremely hard, working through data, listening to the public, having numerous meetings to get to a point to where we're going to be making recommendations to you. So what you will hear during this meeting is some of the work that has been done. We are not making the recommendations at this meeting. We still have some final work to be done before that happens. But once again, the team has been working extremely hard to get to some decisions to put in front of you and your boards and councils in the upcoming next 3 months. So I just want to thank everybody. Welcome the new member, Mr. Curtis Robinhold. And Millicent, we can jump into going around the table. You're on mute, Millicent.
Sorry about that, everybody. You'd think after 2 years. Thank you so much, Administrator Johnson. We're going to mix it up a little bit. I know that we typically go in the same order every week, but we're going to do a little bit of mixing up. It's kind of like when you're in elementary school, if your last name started with W, you always went last. And so maybe I'm waxing poetic in this moment, but I want to make sure that we're providing an opportunity for us to hear from all of the partners in different ways. So we're going to start with our CAG co-chairs. I know you're going to be presenting later, but I wanted to give you the opportunity to provide at least just some opening comments if you'd like to at this time. So CAG co-chair Lynn Ballinger.
Thank you. But when you do this, you catch us completely off guard. So I'm going to defer to my co-chair, whose last name starts with W, but I don't have, I would just report that CAG has been meeting twice a month, and interest and attention continues to be high. And even if I could dare say, a sense of excitement. So with that, I'll defer to Ed for anything else.
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Ed Washington. It's always hard for me to follow Lynn because she's so very good at how she expresses herself. But I'm here in New Orleans, drinking a little piece of coffee, and I just have some kind of a pastry here. And I'm excited about the meeting today. I just want you all to know that the CAG is working hard. There's a great deal of interest in everything that goes on. And I know that at the end of the day, they just want to see a bridge built. And so from that, I'll pass it on to the next person.
Thank you so much, Mr. Washington and Ms. Ballinger. We're going to move to CEO Juliana Marler.
Good morning, everyone. So just a couple of updates since the last time we met. Last Tuesday, we held another freight leadership meeting. I really appreciate the IBR team engaging with the freight community as we're working on getting closer to understand the options that we have before us. And getting their input, obviously in the movement of trucks, it can be really challenging. So really engaging that group has been very to those design options. And the other thing, I've been participating in some meetings through Pacific Northwest Waterway Association. We've been meeting with our federal delegation over the last several days. And it's been really positive and interested feedback that we're meeting from our federal delegates from Oregon and Washington. They're very excited about getting the bridge replaced, and we see a lot of support there. So I just wanted to pass that information on. It's great to see my partner across the river, Curtis. Welcome, good to see you. Thank you.
And speaking of your partner, we're going to ask that Curtis Robinhold, Executive Director of the Port of Portland, read us.
Great, thank you, Madam Chair. Good to see everyone. Good morning. Just by way of introduction, Curtis Robinhold from the Port of Portland. I think everyone is probably noting how much less pleasant and less intelligent I am than Kristen Leonard. Just as a note, Kristen let me know a couple weeks ago that she's planning to depart the port as our Chief Public Affairs Officer. She's terrific, and we wish her all the best. I'm going to represent the port on the ESG, and I just want to give everyone some assurance. I think those of you who know me well know that I've been around the bridge issues for a good long while, including the last iteration 10 or so years ago. But I'm very committed to a replacement bridge. I'm really excited to help get the LPA adopted locally and really move into the bi-state legislative group, ensuring that we're in a good position for funding in 2023. I hope everybody knows I'm at your disposal, happy to talk about any specific issues if you'd like. Just really honored to be with you all working on such an important project. So thanks for the time this morning.
Thank you so much. So now we'll move to our regional governments. I'm going to ask that Board Chair, Executive Director Matt Ransom, greet us.
Thank you. Yeah, and good morning to the group here. I appreciate the opportunity to attend. Just a point of personal reflection, adding on to the comment about the Freight Leadership Group. What a great convening. That session last week is just so important. It reminds me of the extreme, I guess, value of moving big things within the region, and also the relationship to the international gateways and the port facilities that are within the bridge influence area. Oftentimes in the work that I'm doing around the table at RTC, we don't talk about those issues enough. And I think, again, just appreciate the convening. I think we need to be mindful of moving big things, because moving big things also means building big things. And I know within our economy, that's great jobs, vital to just, building the assets that we have, whether it's on the river, in our industrial areas. And again, it's an extremely valuable convening. So thank you again for the effort.
Thanks, Matt. And now we'd like to hear from Metro Council President Lynn Peterson.
Morning, everyone. Lynn Peterson. I am coming to you from the Oregon Zoo today, where we just got off of a tour of a whole bunch of exhibits related to conservation. Just to remind us, we have all sorts of federal partners, and Fish and Wildlife is a big federal partner for us at Oregon Metro Zoo. So appreciate everybody's work on this project, and looking forward to the next couple months.
Thank you so much, President Peterson. Now we'll hear from our transit agencies. First, we'll hear from CEO Sean Donahue.
Thank you. And we'll just report out that I think I appreciate the hard work that continues to be done by the team. The one thing that I think from a transit perspective that we recognize is we're pushing up against a pretty quick time frame to be able to make decisions about a modified LPA. And I would just make a couple comments about that. I think it's been very helpful through conversations directly with our partners on both sides of the river about really the story of Southwest Washington and the things that we've done post CRC to put ourselves in a position for equity and climate, and a lot of the good conversations we're having in real time. And I would like to see the IBR team share some more of that information as it goes along in its presentations. The one thing that I do think needs to be addressed also are items about displacement. We talk about a lot of data, and we talk about a lot of opportunities and options that exist within the realm, but we haven't had a lot of conversation about how that affects displacement, especially in the Jantzen Beach area, Hayden Island and specifically in downtown Vancouver. So I want to make sure that we put those things at the forefront when we talk about presentations at Equity Advisory Group and especially the Community Advisory Team. I think that's extremely important. And with the passing of the Washington state budget, I think it's going to be important for the IBR team to really explain to us how they might be able to expedite some of their timeline as a function of having that $1.2 billion ready to go and pass through the legislature. And we're excited to hear about how we might be able to do some things, hopefully a little faster once both groups are able to make some solid decisions. But again, I appreciate the hard work that's being done. I know there's a lot of folks behind the scenes that are doing good things. And also want to give a shout out to Millicent. She's done an outstanding job of moderating and managing all of these conversations that are happening all over the place. And I don't think you get enough credit for that. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to serve in this capacity and to support this team. So now we'd like to hear from TriMet, Steve Witter.
Great. Good morning, everyone. And I just want to congratulate my friends, partners, and neighbors in Southwest Washington and the state of Washington on such a great achievement with the legislature. And as Sean mentioned, we're looking at ways to sort of capture this lightning in a bottle and advance the project as quickly as we can. Of course, respecting all the issues that still remain that everyone is sharing around the table. So, but it'll come fast, and I'm really excited about it. I also want to share with folks, this will be my second to last meeting. Next month will be my last meeting representing TriMet here. I'll be retiring from TriMet in May, and that's a little bit of a surprise for some, but after 20 years and reaching my retirement goal at TriMet, I'm excited to look to future endeavors, but really value being able to work with all the great leaders around this table. And again, we've done a lot of hard work, and I'm really proud of it. So with that, I'll give it back to you, Millicent. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Steve, for kind of setting me back on my heels a little bit, but congratulations to you. I'm sure others will want to express their congratulations as well, and their thanks for your consistent and persistent leadership at TriMet in the spaces that you've provided leadership to. So congratulations to you. That's quite a step. So now I'm going to move on to the cities. And I believe that Mayor Ann is chomping at the bit. There are a couple things she wants to share, and I'm going to ask that she go ahead and do that.
Well, happy St. Patrick's Day to you. May you have an Irish breakfast. Yes, Sean, you took my excitement. It was at 1.2, so we had to settle on $1 billion. But we'll take it. But you're right. We did have those additional millions allocated in the 2015 Connecting Washington package for the reconstruction of the Mill Plain interchange, and that's a key element to the project. So we're very excited about that. And Steve, congratulations on your retirement. You're absolutely right. We're pretty excited to see how this financial commitment unlocks some of the funding opportunities with our federal and Oregon partners. So top of the morning to you. Brandon, I got it in before you.
All right, thank you, Mayor Ann. Commissioner Hardesty from the City of Portland.
Thank you. Good morning. It's been some aha announcements so far. My head is still spinning, especially since this is Transportation Day, and we're spending more time today. I want to welcome Curtis. Curtis and I get to work together on lots of stuff, and I'm excited to see him at this table, even if it is for just for a bit. Steve, congratulations on your retirement. I thought about retirement once, and every day I think about it here. And let me congratulate Mayor Ann for getting $1 billion from her legislative body, which is an incredible feat for anyone, but especially in Washington State. I mean, all cheers to Mayor Ann and her team. Let me just say that, I feel like I'm kind of split when I have my day of transportation, because, I spend a couple hours in the morning with JPAC, and then I spend a couple hours with this group. and many of the same people are around the table. But the difference, I think, is I think this group has been more intentionally engaged, at least of late, and really getting real information that we can then respond to. And that's what I'm excited about. But what I'm hearing today makes me a little nervous. And I just want to put it out there that there seems to be a rush to the finish line without actually having details that will be important for me to have as I educate my colleagues about this project and where we're going and how we're going to fund it and all the other stuff we've been talking about. So though I understand that there's this rush for federal money, I also am very mindful that we have some big issues that we're still addressing that were not issues that were addressed the last time we tried to do this project. And so I don't want to be a downer, but I also want to be a realist. We don't rush things of this magnitude through the Portland City Council. And we need to make sure that I'm bringing my colleagues along. And I can only do that if I have really specific information that I can share with my other elected colleagues. So don't want to be a Debbie Downer, but I'm thrilled to have this 3 hours today. But I'm ready for the specifics, and I'm not going to be driven by an artificial timeline. I'm going to be driven by the data and by the decision points that we need to make. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Hardesty. I believe that a lot of what you've addressed today will be addressed, what you've mentioned today will be addressed starting today with several of the presentations that you'll hear and the plans that we have for the future to ensure that we're informing the partners to make sure that you're able to comfortably make a decision about the future of this program. All right, so now we'll hear from our DOT partners. We're going to first hear from Brendan Finn from the Office of Urban Mobility. He is standing in for Director Chris Strickler today.
Yes, thank you, Millicent. Top of the morning to everyone. Director Strickler unfortunately couldn't be here today. Sven does want to express his gratitude to everyone here moving this forward. And Mayor Ann, you got me there. May your troubles be less, may your blessings be more, and may nothing but happiness come through your door. And I extend that to the rest of the group here as well. No updates here, Millicent, from ODOT, other than a lot of work, as Commissioner Hardesty just alluded to, on a lot of the things we're trying to drive here in the Portland metropolitan region, and appreciate all the coordination and efforts that everyone's putting into this. So I'll leave it up at that, and I guess pass it over to Mr. Secretary.
Thank you, Brendan. Yes, Secretary Millar from the Washington Department of Transportation.
Thank you and good morning. Three things. One, it's Millicent, thank you for the good work you're doing. I'm looking on the screen and I see OTAC, and I was a principal there from 1990 to 2003. So it's neat to see that some things persist long after I depart from the scene. And I hope the same thing happens with this bridge, that it's there 100 years from now. The second thing, we at WashDOT kind of feel like the dog that caught the car. We have the federal package, and now we have the state package, and it's time to deliver. And it's time to make sure that the stuff that we deliver is worthy of deliverance. And so when we had the ARRA after the Great Recession, we were talking about shovel-ready projects. Now we're talking shovel-worthy investments. And so that's the second thing on my list. And the third thing, I completely agree with Commissioner Hardesty. We need the details to get to the finish line. But I'd like to remind everybody that the finish line is the ribbon cutting. And what we're talking about getting to this summer is more like the starting gate, or maybe a point in the relay where we hand the baton off from initiating the project into the planning and environmental work. So we've done a lot. We have a lot left to do. I completely agree. We should not be schedule driven, but we should also be schedule informed, because that $1 billion that the legislature set aside and the 10 million that they put into my 21-23 budget, so that the amount invested in the program to date by both states is equal. That money is set aside to leverage federal investment and investment by our partners over in Oregon. So great start. Got a long ways to go, and looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Secretary Millar. You said a lot there. I'm looking forward to hearing more about all of the things that you've shared and how what has been invested or proposed for the state of Washington will have a positive effect on the program. You also mentioned that I have OTAC by my signature or by my name, and I need to change that to IBR program. I'm working on several different things right now. So my other hat is the OTAC one. So thank you, though everyone still remembers fondly your time at OTAC. So glad you mentioned that. Now we're going to turn it back over to the program administrator for his full set of updates. Going to spend quite a few more minutes on this part of the agenda than we typically would, but very important information that needs to be shared from the perspective of the program administrator. So Mr. Johnson, take it away.
Thank you, Millicent. If we could pull the slide deck up, but before we jump into that, I want to acknowledge the tremendous work that has been done by Steve Witter to help move this program forward. So Steve, we will, your absence will be missed. We have done some great work with you putting shoulder to the wheel. So thank you.
Greg, I'll see you at public testimony.
You aren't going to be carrying protest signs, are you?
Not at all.
So, and secondly, before we jump in, I'd also like to say happy St. Patrick's Day, and let Mayor Ann and Brendan know that we painted the bridge green just for you. So that's my joke of the day. So we have a couple of things that this group needs to know about what's been going on in the program in specific. So first, I'm going to invite our Deputy Program Administrator, Ray Mabey, to talk about the tolling administration question that is related to IBR. So Ray, if you would take the floor.
Well, sure. Good morning. Ray Mabey, Assistant Program Administrator.
Excuse me, is there going to be a slideshow? Because if not, could we see people?
We do have a couple of slides coming up on my topic, and I think we'll bounce back, Commissioner. What I wanted to share with you today is an update on decision around the administration of tolls for the Interstate Bridge program. We know that programs of this size and complexity require all sorts of funding to make them possible. Not only a local match like we saw from the Washington legislature, federal grants from FTA and hopefully Federal Highway Administration, but then a user fee, typically in the form of tolls, rounds out program funding. And this program is no different. Could I get the next slide, please? And one of the first decisions that we need to make around that is who would administer the tolls. In the previous effort, the only agency at the table that had a toll program up and running was the Washington DOT. And of course, they've got great experience with that then and more now. But looking at IBR, the question was really, how do we make this decision about the toll administrator for the program, and what's changed? Kind of a similar thing for us. And so we sat down with both agencies' toll programs and focused on really what are the concerns that that we need to consider as we make that decision. And most of them focused on the customer experience and the setting up of the system. As this is a bi-state program, we're going to have new or different rules to establish. And as ODOT is setting up its toll program, they're best positioned to adopt and to change or develop, adapt to those rules as opposed to something that's already underway and has a lot of great history. But also the user experience in tolls themselves and customer support. And so last week, we brought a memorandum of understanding before our Transportation Commission in Oregon, and they concurred with the decision to have ODOT be the toll administrator. And as such, after that, the director and secretary executed that MOU. Now, I want to make sure we understand what that MOU is or isn't, and isn't. It is just a decision on between the states about who will administer the tolls. What it isn't is how to set those toll rates, how to do cost sharing, all the other things that need to happen. But this really starts and sets the stage for the ODOT toll program to build IBR into its development plan so they can be ready for us when we need to seek their services. Next slide, please. So regardless of actually who's administering the tolls, we know that there are several things that we need to pay attention to. Collaboration between both states and the program on business rules and operation procedures need to be developed and agreed to. We know that both commissions of Washington and Oregon Transportation Commissions, they are the bodies that have the authority to set rates, to establish exemptions and discounts, including low-income discounts. So that is something we can advise, but those decisions are up to those bodies. So that still has to happen. We know that we are seeking and will need interoperability between both systems that are applied up in the Puget Sound area and in Oregon. And so that close coordination between both tolling programs and the IBR have begun and are ongoing. And we know that Oregon's responsible for the cost of our program, and that the additional costs to implement and add IBR to that will be shared by both states. And then the toll revenues will be used to help us cover our program costs and to continue to collect those tolls, pay for the construction and operation and maintenance of the facility. So that's just a quick update. Happy to take questions, but want to let people know this is a pivotal decision to help us move forward on the tolling, variable rate tolling portion of the program.
Thank you, Ray. So we do have a couple of questions. President Peterson.
Yeah, thank you. It was a little bit of a surprise to read this in the materials. Just, I think would have been good to have been getting updates all along on this discussion and the pros and cons and just why the decision was made. I don't really necessarily have any issue with it, but I would like to just call our attention to what the list of things that the money would be used for from the tolling. And I just want to get clarification that the project in terms of its community benefits agreement work, I didn't see that included in what the tolling could pay for. And I just wanted to clarify.
President Peterson, that is a good point. I think we are looking at what all the different needs are in the program, whether it's funding portions of community benefits agreement, how we cover the O&M for the high capacity transit. All these things are on the table to be aware of. We tried to make that statement pretty broad and not be exclusive. So just because it's not listed doesn't mean it won't be under consideration. Thank you for raising it.
Thank you. Mayor Ann?
Thank you very much. I think it is going to be absolutely essential that every word you use in the presentation of this is very, very carefully stated. I don't want the public to be confused that tolling on the bridge is going to be paying for Oregon's tolling of I-5 and 205 and the Abernathy Bridge and everything else. So it's going to be essential that the public is not confused that the I-5 bridge toll is anything but what we say it is, and that is to help pay for this bridge and to reduce the congestion and to change behavior. But it is not for that third piece, and that is for projects in Oregon. So please be very careful on what language and bullet points you use for the presentation on that. Thank you.
Very good, Council Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor Ann. Secretary Millar.
Thank you. Great comments from my colleagues on the ESG. I would add just the commission in Oregon and the commission in Washington operate in different ways. So it's important that everybody understand that on the Washington side, a lot of that policy is going to be set by the state legislature. So they give direction to the commission, and the commission then takes their appropriate action within the sideboards that the legislature gives them. It may happen to a degree with Oregon as well. The other thing to remember about tolling in both Washington and Oregon is the use of the money is restricted by both constitutions. Thanks.
Thank you, Secretary Millar. I'm sorry, Ray.
No, I just was saying thank you as well. Thank you. And we have one more or two more?
We have two more, Commissioner Hardesty and then Matt Ransom.
Thank you. I just want to echo Chair Peterson's concern that these decisions were made without us actually even knowing that this decision was going to happen. I'd like to know if we actually, rather than looking at what we had in place, if we actually did any analysis about best practices around tolling, rather than actually taking the approach where Washington has this and Oregon has that, so that's just married it to. So I'm very concerned that a major decision was made that will impact not just this project, but how congestion pricing / tolling will happen in the entire Portland metro area. Because the JPAC table, we were just having this conversation. So basically what I'm hearing is that the electeds in the region have no authority to have any impact on the decisions that are going to be coming out of this process. That's based on the fact that if tolling as has been presented is the only option and paying back three-way construction is the only revenue that is being generated, then that causes me a great deal of concern.
Commissioner Hardesty, thanks for the points in the question. And I offer that we'd be happy to meet with you to tell you, share the more details about how this decision was arrived at. There's a lot that went into it. The thoughts around some of those allowances and low income changes. We do know that Oregon is investigating that. I think Washington as well. Much easier, I think, for Oregon at this point to account for those in this tolling program than Washington. There's other factors that went into it. The point is that the tolling is a key part of the funding picture of the program. I think that's been established, and it will definitely help with our congestion management, congestion relief, and the behavior changes we've talked about providing options for people with high capacity transit. But the administrator itself is just that first decision. It could be either, but we think Oregon is best suited. And we definitely would offer to follow up with you and go over the decision more so you understand what went into that.
I would really appreciate it because it just feels like we're being squeezed into a box, and every meeting we're being told that, oh, other people make that decision. So again, I've been elected. I have a constituency, and I have an investment in us getting this bridge done and getting it done well. But I cannot ignore that the status quo has never worked, especially for communities of color. the way we've always done major transportation projects has never worked. And I actually believe strongly that this new Federal Transportation Administration shares these concerns about who benefits and who doesn't from these major transit projects. So the fact that we as a state continue to say we're in this very narrow box as compared to trying to bust the box a bit open so that we can be intentional about addressing both the reality of racially disparate outcomes, as well as reducing congestion and addressing climate change. I am hearing us present what we presented the first go round as if it's a fact, right? But we're just using different words, and that is concerning me at this point. So I want to, for the sake of full disclosure, I want this bridge. We need this bridge, but we need to do it right because it will be here for the next generation.
Agreed. We'll look forward to setting that up with you.
Thank you, Commissioner Hardesty. Executive Director Ransom, and then Secretary Millar.
Yeah, building on the theme here, there's great public interest in this topic. I mean, that might be the understatement of the day. I think it's incumbent upon the project just to be, whether it's through some creative graphic or other, just be clear about the process flow. I mean, there are people with authorities vested to make certain decisions. That's what I understand this conversation to have been. There's an MOU given their authority to start to jointly make the decision. So I think for my purpose around our board table, just understanding the flow, how this committee flows into with our recommendations, et cetera, I think is of great value. So I look forward to seeing that. A point of clarifying interest, Secretary Millar pointed out the Washington's authority, but I understand also, legislatively it has to be granted. To my understanding, that authority has not been granted yet, and just any sense of when that might occur, maybe the next session. And so just clarify that point. Thank you.
Thank you, Executive Director Ransom. Secretary Millar.
Thanks, and Matt's point reflects on what I was going to say. We've made one very, very small decision between the two agencies, and we talked about making this decision at earlier meetings. And all the MOU is about is which agency administers the tolling program for the bridge. It doesn't say anything about the policies that would be administered. It doesn't say anything. We made no decisions about anything to do. It's completely separate from what's happening in Oregon with tolling at a regional level. It's just about where are the computers going to be? Where's the back office going to be? Who do you call when you have a complaint when we're actually operating a tolling system? All of the policy decisions are in the future. And so I want to make sure that if people are upset that the process wasn't inclusive, the decision that was made is a relatively modest decision about basically which office is going to implement whatever decisions you make in our respective state legislatures. So that's one thing. And Matt's absolutely right. In Washington State, nothing gets told until the legislature enables that. And so there's a lot of work yet to be done. And this was one small step. It's a significant step in that WashDOT's Good to Go program would not be administering this. It would be Oregon. But what it is has not been decided yet. And there's a lot of conversation yet to go.
Thank you, Secretary Millar. The last comment on this item will be from from President Peterson.
Thank you. I think just to bring this full circle, I think what you're hearing is, with all due respect to both the DOTs, a certain lack of clarity on the future of tolling within the region, and I mean including Vancouver. We don't have financial plans that have been relayed to us on any of the projects, nor how any of the congestion pricing tolling is going to actually work. And so you're we're at a disadvantage in this conversation of understanding why this decision was made and why it was made outside. And I'm not saying that we would have weighed in necessarily, but we do not have an understanding of what the benefits and costs were, the rationale, and now it's very out of context at this point because there are no system-wide plans being discussed. And there are a series of decisions going on in the region about where to make the decisions about this tolling program, and it's not clear. So I would just call for clarity on the Oregon side if that's what we're going to be doing. And I can't overemphasize that enough, and working with the partners to get that clarity, not just deciding that clarity. So I'm going to put an exclamation point and a big red flag. It's a giant red flag that these decisions are being made without any context or discussion or heads up. And they will add up cumulatively to issues, as we have already seen. JPAC was a very difficult discussion this morning. So, all right, thank you.
Thank you, President Peterson. Ray, did you have any final comments before we transition to the conversation that Administrator Johnson will have with us?
I definitely appreciate the comments and perspective, and we'll definitely I'll welcome and understand those. Secretary Millar's comments were the point is that policy decisions are in front of you and us and will be brought back here. I guess I'd make the same offer to you, President Peterson, that I made to Commissioner Hardesty. If you need additional background about how the decision was made, we'd be very happy to review that with you. We did review this with our different groups, SLG and PMG. So this wasn't in a vacuum, but I hear you.
Thank you, Ray. All right, Administrator Johnson, you have several things you'd like to share. You might want to follow up a little bit on what Ray just discussed, but we are going to put the slide up for everyone to see the items that will be discussed. We can take the slide back down, but want to make sure that there's clarity about the things that Administrator Johnson is going to be sharing.
Okay, so we will do some follow-up and clarification on this decision point, and I agree with Secretary Millar that this is a first step in a series of steps that will define what tolling will look like and where policy will be set. So more to come. So a couple of weeks ago, I had the privilege to travel to DC. We had a American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials meeting, and we had the ability to set a meeting with the US DOT, which both Secretary Millar and Director Strickler and myself participated with the leadership of US DOT. And we found that they are very much aware of this program, and it is a priority for them. As a national priority for economic corridors. So a great conversation. We talked about the availability of grants and strategies that may be most beneficial to not only this program, but to not interfere with other priorities that each individual state may have for certain programs. So very good conversation. So while we were there, we had the opportunity to visit several congressional offices and virtually have conversation with a couple of the U.S. Senate offices. And once again, very good reception on where we are at in the program. We updated them on all of the activities. So some very good feedback from each of the offices on both sides of the river. So it was very, very beneficial meeting, and I would ask Secretary Millar if he would like to weigh in with any of his observations on that important trip.
Just that it was a successful visit, and we have partners at the federal level who understand the importance of this project and are supportive of our efforts and of our process and of our commitment to climate and equity.
So, and I would like to say my memory is good enough to remember what my next bullet is, but I need to see that slide again. So we've talked a little bit about the Move Ahead Washington legislation that passed through the House and Senate in Washington. We know that this is still is awaiting the signature of the governor before it becomes official. But I just want to thank all of the partners in Washington who put shoulder to the wheel to get this important piece of legislation to the point where it is now. This is an important endorsement of the program and what we are doing. This is a much bigger picture thing. The IBR is just one of the elements of a larger package, but it does show that the commitment to getting this thing done in the state of Washington. So this is very important for future, as Sean Donahue referenced. This will allow us to move some things forward as far as funding commitments, and talking to our partners at Federal Transit Administration. They need to see dollar commitments as before we can move into some next step processes. So this will serve the program tremendously well in putting us on the track to getting this thing done. So last but not least, we have been talking to both the Community Advisory Group and the Equity Advisory Group and rolling out the processes for the locally preferred alternative. So there was questions from those groups as to what their role would be and what IBR would be doing with the information gathered from both of these groups. So just a quick roadmap of what we are doing and where we are going with the information being gathered. So we're running the analysis, running the data in all of the scenarios that have been asked from the partners. We are taking that information as one set of information. We also have done surveys. We've been listening to the public. We've had working groups that has given us input on different elements. We are taking that as another data point. We are taking the advice and input from the Community Advisory Group and the Equity Advisory Group as another point of information. We are looking at the screening criteria that has been set and using that as another point of information. So all of this is accumulating to inform us of a recommendation that we will be making to the executive steering group in late April that will put all of these recommendations on the table for this group to look at, to work through. And at that point, it will be going to your boards and councils for their discussion. But we look at this as a accumulation of information that will lead the IBR team to make a recommendation to both you. And then after we receive your input and endorsement to move forward, we will then take it to the bi-state ledge for their input as to what they are willing to fund. So that is the process map of how we will work this modified locally preferred alternative through the process, and by hopefully the end of July, have an endorsement from both this body and the bi-state legislative committee. So with that, before we go into the details, I'll take any questions, and then we're going to have a more detailed mapping of information that will be coming to you. So any questions on the role of the advisory groups and the other information points that are being derived by the program? I get off easy.
You did a great job. So that looks like we're going to move into the next part of the agenda. Thanks for jumping on, John. John Willis, who is the project manager for the IBR program, is going to walk us through the next steps in the process. And you have the enviable task of trying to help to make up a little bit of the time that we lost. So I know this is an important step, though, so everybody's going to need to work together to do that. John.
Thank you. Yeah, John Willis, Deputy Project Manager for the Interstate Bridge Program. I'll be presenting a portion of this in conjunction with Katie Belliconi and Aaron Dees, who represent our government relations team. So as Greg mentioned, we are facing a set of decisions. We are at the spring and summer timeframes that we talked about a year ago that we knew we were going to be running through. And here we are. And today you're going to see some of the work. We keep talking about the work our team's doing. I know you want to get to details, so let me provide that high level overview of where we're going. We've defined this as our affectionately known as our bubble chart that defines all of the activities that are running concurrently. Through January and February, we continue to take a look and evaluate our options, see how they performed in conjunction with your staff. In order to get to a modified LPA. That modified LPA, as Greg mentioned, is the definition we need to go to take into the next step of the program. Through March and April, that's right now, we are developing and refining what that would look like, what that recommendation would look like, and weaving together all of the design options. We've really got some focused areas for design options that we've been looking at, including transit investments, Hayden Island and Marine Drive. Those are two you're going to hear about today, and the river crossing. These are very specific, tangible looks, but we're also taking a look at the evaluation of how the auxiliary lanes work in terms of function and safety and operations. Those are evaluations we can't do on a component, but rather on the whole project. Same with a set of scenarios we're looking at for tolling scenarios, not setting the rates, but rather looking at sensitivity. All of that is coming in as we speak right now. And our goal is to get this information, not just to ESJ, but also to our advisory groups in a multi-step approach. So today you're going to hear a lot of information about it. We hope to bring that back so we can have discussions. That's our approach to put this out in pieces so it's not as overwhelming. It's a very big and complex program.
John,
yes.
John, if I can take one moment of privilege, and
please.
I forgot to mention it during my presentation, that when we say we are talking about the IBR team, but we are also talking about the staff level group that includes staff from all of the partner agencies who have been working with us, who have been helping us run through scenarios, who have been parsing data with us. So this is not just the IBR team. This is also staffers from each of your organizations that are helping us get to these decision points. So thank you, John. Sorry for the interruption.
Well, thank you, Administrator Johnson. I think it's really important. We do use the grand we when we talk about it, and the feedback from the staff of all of your agencies has been valuable and actually essential in getting us to where we are. As we get to May, we will, as Administrator Johnson mentioned, we will get the recommendation for the modified LPA in front of boards and councils, ultimately an endorsement, and I'll go through, Katie and Aaron will go through a little more detail on the details of that timeline. We get to an endorsement with this group later in June and July, and ultimately Administrator Johnson makes a recommendation of the bi-state legislative committee. In the next few slides, I'm going to talk about, excuse me, I'm going to talk about what the program recommendation is, the steps to get there, including your role and the timeline to develop the modified LPA. So let's go to the next slide, please. Some of you have seen this graphic before, and a key thread in our presentation here is we are looking at what has changed since the record of decision in 2003. So that very unique process that we're going through right now is to open up the project, recognize what has changed, and make a recommendation that we can then move forward. The key components of the modified locally preferred alternative include a transit investment. I'll talk a little bit more about that when we speak about transit, but that will include mode, alignment, and potentially terminus, but we don't know where we'll land with that yet. We are also looking at Hayden Island and Marine Drive interchange. A lot of changes since 2013 have created the need for us to take a deeper dive into those two interchanges, as well as the number of auxiliary lanes, as I mentioned on the prior slide. What does it take to make this project work and function in a way that we hope it will? Other considerations that will make their way into the program definition, but may not be part of the formal locally preferred alternative, include the bridge crossing and alignment, the Vancouver interchanges. We've seen some changes since 2003, not as dramatic as Hayden Island and Marine Drive, but some of those changes will be looked at as well. It's important to note two things, regardless of what analysis we're doing. We are assuming the replacement of the North Portland Harbor Bridge. That's the bridge that spans between the mainland of Oregon and Hayden Island. We are also looking at active transportation improvements throughout the program area, regardless of what option or investment we take into our environmental process. Your staff have seen some detailed evaluations of active transportation as we've looked at interchanges. We've gone into that deep dive to make sure what we're proposing is functional and able to be built. So we've actually been kind of scratching some of that itch in some areas of the project. And it's great to see the connections we can make on both sides of the river for active transportation. That's the bit of the what. Let's go to the next slide. So this is the buildup, and I will happily turn it over to Katie and Aaron for the next slide. But the buildup to get to the modified LPA, as Administrator Johnson mentioned, steering group and advisory groups continue to provide feedback on the major components to the grand we, us and your staff, to the LPA in March and April, where we're going. And these will be considered in that decision-making process. So think about the decision as not the recommendation is not something that's purely technical, but something that takes technical expertise, partner agency feedback, screening results to evaluate how investments fare against each other and against our no build option, and the traffic modeling data. Everybody loves to talk about the traffic modeling data, where we do our best job to gaze into a crystal ball and predict how this facility will be used in which modes. And finally, the equity analysis. That's all baked into a recommendation for the LPA that we will have a chance to have a regional conversation about. Secondly, the program will identify a recommendation that considers all the inputs from our partners, EAG and CAG. And that formal process is listed in the following bullets, where we talk about the partner boards and councils will be able to review the modified LPA beginning in May, and the program will summarize the outcome of those conversations for your endorsement of the LPA. And finally, we hope to get to a consensus recommendation from you for those elements, as my good friend Kelly Betteridge, who is not here today, describes as the overlapping Venn diagrams of all our partners on something we can agree on at a local level, so that we can send that signal to the bi-state legislative committee for endorsement. And I am going to turn it over to Katie and Aaron to talk a little more in detail about the timeline.
Thanks, John. I'll just take a moment and orient folks to the timeline associated with the process John just outlined. At the end of April, you can expect to see the program's recommended modified LPA become public and come before both the CAG and the ESG at those meetings. This will then be the launching point in early May with our 8 program partners reviewing and discussing the recommended LPA with their various boards and councils. Here are various boards and councils. South of the river, specifically with the City of Portland and Metro, there will also be some additional advisory committee meetings and commission meetings that will need to consider the elements of the LPA during this time frame. The program partners, boards, or councils will have 1 to 2 meetings to become familiar with the recommended modified LPA, and then a meeting to endorse that recommendation. This process will take place from early to mid-May, all the way through early to mid-July. As John said, after that, we anticipate the ESG will consider making a consensus recommendation collectively mid-July of the modified LPA after your respective governing bodies have done the same individually. And lastly, we propose that the bi-state legislative committee consider endorsing the modified LPA at a late July meeting. This has been the program's plan and timeline for the last several months, but has become even more clear as a pathway with the Washington Supplemental Transportation Budget, specifically calling out language requiring the program to deliver a report to the Washington legislature by August 1st. That includes the LPA. Next slide for John.
So what happens after all of that? And by the way, what Katie described is a really important set of steps. But we always like to make sure we're keeping our eye on the next phases, the next steps. Beyond the modified LPA, our goal to get to the LPA is to get the region to be in a position to provide a program definition that we can use for multiple utility. One is to signal to both of our state legislatures that we have a locally preferred alternative, but also to get definition to take into the supplemental environmental impact statement. And that needs to be reflective of the changes, again, that we've seen since the 2013 record of decision. As Secretary Millar noted earlier, entering the NEPA process really signifies the start of a lot of the in-depth analysis and evaluation of the program. And not to, of course, to acknowledge all the hard work that's taken us to get here. This really is an important point in launching off, getting the program defined. So there will be opportunities during the supplemental environmental impact statement phase to get additional details and recommendations on the overall bridge design and the design in general of the entire program. We've also will be able to look at how we've avoided and minimized impacts that the program may create, but also consider mitigations for those impacts that we cannot avoid. And finally, we get opportunities to provide input for community engagement at a very deep level that runs parallel to the federal NEPA process. And so that's the part I'm excited for us to get into, and that will start in July and August as we wrap up the phase that Katie just described. And with that, I will pause and see if we have any questions on our process.
I don't see any hands raised.
Okay.
There we go. Commissioner Hardesty.
I saw Steve pop his hand up before mine.
Okay. It was
After you, Commissioner.
All right, I tell you, we're all very polite. So I just wanted to just acknowledge that that's an extremely tight timeline. And again, I hope that there's built-in flexibility, because the vision of talking to an entire elected body in a couple of meetings and they're going to sign off is a very optimistic view of how politics happen. So again, it's an extremely aggressive timeline, and with not a lot of information, it does not appear that that is really realistic.
Thank you, Commissioner Hardesty.
I'm still trying to feel optimistic about this, but I just have to say that when you tell me I get to speak to my colleagues twice before I ask them to make a major decision like this, I don't think that's a realistic expectation.
So Commissioner Hardesty, I understand that we will make ourselves available for whether it's individual updates to get folks up to speed. We
Yeah,
are.
I think the biggest challenge, excuse me for interrupting, I was going to say Director Johnson, but excuse me. But of course, I've been involved since I became Transportation Commissioner. My concern is that my colleagues are tied up in budget right now, right? And during your time period that you have laid out is the exact time where we will be voting on a $5 billion budget that for our next year of operation. What I'm telling you is no matter how available you are, my colleagues will have less availability now than they have outside of a budget process. Our budget will be completed, primarily completed by the end of May, and then the vote will be affirmed in June. So I'm just, just trying to understand your timeline and the reality of where we are as a council, right? In the midst of a insane budget process. I think you're putting unrealistic expectations on me to be able to deliver a vote that I'm telling you that based on where we are in this moment, that timeline is very unrealistic.
Understood.
Thank you, Commissioner. Steve.
Thank you.
Commissioner carried my message very clearly. Just the notion about 2 meetings was really my question. But then, as she illustrated, the commissioner trimits on the same budget sort of calendar as the city. So we will work as hard as we can, but it's not my availability, it's those of my leaders. So thank you.
Thank you, Steve. President Peterson.
Yes, just to echo, it might be a little out of order, but I want to make sure I get the full concept in here. I know that you'll be sharing information as soon as you have it, but I'm getting concerned that we're not going to have enough time to understand how all of the variables are going to perform together and what will come out as a recommendation. And also the fact that there might only be one recommendation that actually doesn't get us in all 3 that meets all 3 kind of realms of decision making, the political, the technical, and the financial. I'm concerned that if we're just going to get one recommendation based on a series of assumptions, that it's not going to actually allow us to see how the 3 components of the transit, the variable rate tolling, and the number of lanes on the bridge, all of these components that we've come down to, right? All the narrowing that we're doing, how they play out in different ways. So just as we go through this, I'm just going to say on the record, I know I've been saying it to you, Greg, I'm concerned about one staff recommendation. I would rather see us get to 3 scenarios that meet different objectives and then have a conversation about how to narrow it down to a staff recommendation. So if we could figure out how to get that into the timeline, I think I would prefer that than to just have a pretty surprising staff recommendation, because I think that's what's going to happen. I think it's going to be a shock to the system if there's just one recommendation without a narrowing down.
So the narrowing down is the process that we are currently in with the staff members from each of the partner agencies. We have been looking at and running the scenarios that were requested by partners to look at different elements, to look at how maximizing high capacity transit throughput, how maximizing tolling and taking into account the tolling that will appear on I-5 and I-205 as projected by ODOT. So all of those scenarios we are running. And
I understand we're running separate scenarios and different elements, but how those things integrate depending on assumptions, that's what I'm talking about.
Oh, and I'm speaking, we do have the big picture of all of those together and the impacts that has on the number of lanes, the impact that has on Hayden Island, all of those things are being looked at holistically, not as separate entities. One of the concerns of taking multiple things forward is it complicates and the next step in the process. But we will take the advice of this body if you want to see different things different than what we are projecting to bring to you. We will take that advice and if that is the will of this body, because we are just recommending. This body is the body that is going to give us direction as to whether you accept it or not.
Thank you. Executive Director Ransom.
Yeah, just not going to critique ambition. Certainly we support that and understand it. As an association of governments, I mean, the MPOs, we have a lot of constituents around the table. I recognize the work that your team's been doing to sort of reach out to the constituents that are participant at the RTC table and encourage you to continue to do that. So supportive, but you know, you're going to fit a schedule that meets all of our needs. Question really about the milestone in July. So I think what I understood, and I think Secretary Millar just said this moments ago, it's really the big building blocks that we're putting in place to get into the starting gates. But the milestone in July is really to then put us into the NEPA process. You have to publish the formal notice in the Federal Register. We have to convene the federal and partner agencies to start the technical review of the aspects of the project. I think it would be helpful in certainly the table that I'll help orchestrate the decision in July, and then are there opportunities based on the impact analysis that's forthcoming to change or to pivot? If it's determined that the impacts are too great or this option didn't play out, those building blocks, can they evolve between July and the final environmental impact statements? I think it's important maybe to have a simple understanding of that, something that we can explain within the community, that we can explain around the policy board tables, because I don't want to trivialize the decision in July, but at the same time, I don't want to conflate it for what it's not, which is perhaps the final project decision, that rather this is a step along the process. So anything that you could do, your team can do to help navigate policy boards with some clarity around that topic, I think would be useful for my purpose. Thank you.
Understood. We will put something together that speaks to that, but you're absolutely right. The supplemental environmental impact statement process is a very public process that will look at impacts, that will uncover fatal flaws or things that cannot be mitigated for. So those are the things that, once again, we will be refining what this thing is and getting to finally what we're going to take into preliminary design after we receive a amended record of decision.
And again, if I could just continue to reemphasize, and if there's a need to pivot, if there's a need to change, is that permissive, or can that be done post-July when the studies reveal the true extent of impacts, benefits, et cetera?
Yes, that is part of the process.
Thank you. Secretary Millar.
Yeah, thank you. And I just want to clarify for my colleagues that the decision that we're being asked to make this summer is not to pick an alternative to build. It is to pick an alternative to test through the National Environmental Policy Act process. And a project of this scale doesn't come out of the NEPA process looking like it did when it went into the NEPA process. Every concern you have, any concern that anybody has about any of the elements of the project can and will be tested through NEPA. And we can take a locally preferred alternative. And again, what you're going to get this spring is a staff recommendation. And what we're asking you to do as you evaluate the staff recommendation is hopefully buy onto the concept, but let us know what your concerns are too, so we can build those concerns into our NEPA process and address them through the NEPA process. You're not being asked to take to your elected bodies, and we're not asking those bodies to make a decision, hey, let the two DOTs go build this thing. What we're asking you to do is this is the thing that we're going to put through the NEPA meat grinder, if you will, and something very different is going to come out on the other side of that, with public input, with policymaker input, with more data than we have now. And it will change. There's no question it will change, as it needs to change to make sure that we've identified all the impacts and mitigated for all the impacts. So we're asking a lot, and I understand that. The team's asking a lot of me in my role, and we're asking a lot of you. But in July, that's basic. And this is the thing that we're going to see if it works. And the things, all of the places where the different elements interact, if they're not integrating well, that's where we get the chance to see that and to fix it. And so I hope, without in any way minimizing the size of the decision we're making, and understanding completely the lift that we're asking of you, we need to do a better job just explaining what the decision is and the opportunities to modify, to change, to make it better as we go along. I think the team needs to be very, very, very clear about that and give you the tools so that you can be very, very, very clear with your colleagues about what this decision is and what this decision is not, and the opportunities to make it better going forward, so that when we finally do come back to you, and we will at some point, hopefully, there will be a time when we say, this is what we propose to build. Are you good with it? But that is not the question we're asking this summer.
I would like to say thank you, Secretary Millard. That was a very elegant and accurate description of what we're trying to, the point we're trying to get to in July. What we're doing is getting into the stadium. And there's a lot of decisions within that stadium. It's a big stadium with a lot of things that have to be tested through the supplemental process. So I agree 100%. So thank you for that clarification.
I see President Peterson's hand is raised.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate everything everybody has said. I just want to be extremely clear as well. And that is that what I am hearing may be different than what you are trying to get across, but what I am hearing is that the different combinations of elements will be discussed at a staff level, and then a staff recommendation will be made. And if that is the direction we are going, then I think we're going to have a big problem, because we need to have a transparent, accountable process in which there are several different combinations of things that are discussed in the pros and cons, and whether they meet purpose and need, whether they meet all the community benefits agreements discussions, whether they meet the racial equity goals, whether they meet the greenhouse gas emissions. It can't just be one. If it is just one, the enemy of the good, the perfect, right, will fail us. And so I want to be clear that we are looking at a series of potential combinations before we get a staff recommendation. Not just the scenarios that are being played out now, but each one of those elements that are being tested right now way differently in different combinations with each other. And that's what I am asking for. So thank you. I hope to get some sort of response on that, and look forward to talking more about it.
So we need to have a more in-depth conversation about what this body is expecting to see in April at our April meeting. So I will engage folks and get that understanding and make sure it is clear to our team. And I think we are doing the work that you've asked us to do. I think we're talking at different levels of where this thing is at. So we will seek clarification and seek to satisfy the needs of this this group and get that clarified before we come back to you in April with what recommendation or recommendations are to be put on the table.
Commissioner Hardesty?
Thank you. I want to appreciate Administrator Millard, is that right? Is that your title? I forget what they call DOT people.
Secretary.
I'm the secretary
Secretary.
over here, and Chris is a director, and I have friends that are commissioners. Just don't call me late for dinner, right?
It's hard to keep all these titles and jurisdictions thingamajigs. I appreciated what you said. However, what you laid out as what you're asking us to do is not in any documentation that I have. Right. So based on where I am at the moment, and as Chair Peterson alluded to, I actually thought that even today we'd be actually saying, here are 3 options that we have, right? And we've looked at this and we think this is a bad option because of XYZ, right? We looked at this and we think this has more promise, right? And this is the reason why. I don't delegate my decision-making to my staff. So when you're talking to them about 20 options, and then you're going to bring me 1, that doesn't feel like that I'm getting the opportunity to make the decision that you're asking me to make, right? You're just saying, well, based on the people in the back room, they said this is the right option. I'm not going to go with that, right? So I agree with Chair Peterson that I want to know what you're rejecting. Right. And I don't need 500 pages for each. A 1-pager would be just fine. We looked at this option and we rejected it for XYZ. Right. I mean, I don't want you to do a lot more work, but you're telling me you're doing all this work, but I don't see it. I can't touch it. I can't feel it. Right. And you're telling me that this is a major decision point, but it's not that important because it's going to change later. Right. In July, which even makes me a bit more nervous than I was when I got here today. So for me, it would be really important for somebody to say, what are we rejecting? What are we just taking off the table? And again, it doesn't have to be really elaborate, but I want to know like how to connect these dots for my colleagues. Now, I've been here at the table and I don't think I've missed a meeting since I've been on the committee. But if I'm this confused about the decision that you're asking me to make in July, which is only a couple of months away, can you imagine what my colleagues are going to be like when I go talk to them about, yeah, this is a big decision, but not really that big because it's going to change. But I just need you to say yes now, but we'll come back later with another decision. I don't know that I could sell that.
So what we're asking of the executive steering group is to tell us that the work that we have done to date and what we have created for a box, not everything that's inside of the box, but the box that we have created takes into account all of your concerns. That we have run the data, that we have run scenarios that you have asked us to run. And now we have this box that once we go into the next phase, we're going to start clarifying what that box looks like, what the impacts are, and whether things have to change inside of that box. But we're trying to narrow this down to a finite set of things that we would carry forward into this supplemental environmental process. So,
and I agree with that 100%, but I think the part that you are not hearing, and Chair Peterson has said this, and I've said it a couple of times, is as elected officials, we want to see what you are rejecting.
Oh, and we are going to get that to you. We are going through the process now of creating the tables that do exactly what you're saying, that says, okay, this was here, and the reason this was not selected is this reason. So there will be information that will be given to you before we meet with you for this. Before it goes to your boards and councils, you will see those tables of everything that was looked at.
So I could help you be more effective in talking to my council if I could get information to help educating them as we're moving through this process. The fact that we're going to wait until the last moment and then we're going to reveal information to me that I can then reveal to my other elected colleagues, and then a week later ask them to vote on it, is not a really good way to build public support for a major project like this, right? We already know that there are a lot of distractors for this project, and I want to help you get my board to a unanimous vote. And I can only do that if you're giving me information that I can then share with my other elected colleagues on an ongoing basis, not when we get to the end of the baseball game, to then come and say, okay, now here's what we did in the dugout, right? And I'm not a sports fan, so my sports analogies really are not good, right? But you get my point, right? My point is that if you're giving me information in March that I can now share and say, this is where we are in the process, then in April, I can say, this is where we've moved, this is what we've looked at, this is what we've rejected. Then in May, I can say, okay, we're getting it narrowed down a little bit. I can't do that, not with the information I have today.
So, Commissioner, I understand different entities, different partners interact differently. So we set up two different groups. We have a staff level group and we have a program management level group, which are top level folks in each of the partner agencies.
I trust my people, but I'm sorry, you're not hearing.
Well, what I'm saying to you, we will come directly to you and share this with you directly. But that is not what the request was when we set up these groups. It was to work through the staff level group and the program management group to get to these solutions, to see the sausage being made. We created the intergovernmental agreements for that very purpose. We will come to you at any time you desire and lay out everything that has been done. We have no concern about doing that.
Administrator Johnson, if I may, can
I was going to say we're some of that will actually happen today. If we can get to those presentations, that is why this meeting was extended, so that we could make sure that we get to the point where we're able to show you what has been happening to date and walk you through some of the decision making that we have been processing through over the course of the past several months with your staff, both staff level group and PMG members. But we recognize we need to socialize the information with you in this space and allow you to, not allow, excuse me, I said I wasn't going to use that word, ensure that you have the opportunity to see what is happening as it's happening. So we look forward to moving on. In fact, the very next presentation will be the beginning of that conversation that I think will be meaningful and critical. I see Secretary Millar's hand is raised, and if after you make your comment, we're able to move on, that would be great.
Well, that was going to be my comment. I appreciate what everybody is saying. I think Greg and the team have heard it. We need to do a better job integrating you into the decision-making process, because it is not the team that's making the decisions, it's you that are making the decisions. So let's get into that conversation so that we can start making some decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Millar. John, did you still want to comment, or were we thinking and saying the same things?
I think we're all thinking the same thing. I do appreciate the conversation. I'll just add that our team, we have to do a better job of describing how we are entering into the next phase, what this is, what this isn't, and being more clear. It's big and it's complicated, and it's hard to describe, but I think we can accommodate some of those requests. And the only other thing I would add, we are looking at combinations as President Peterson requested, and not today, but you will see those combinations, how these perform. And for your staff that were involved in the TOTS, the transit sessions, the TOTS sessions, those combinations were run with all of these things in mind. And so we can talk a little bit about that as we wrap this up into a unified set of a multimodal solution.
So John,
Yes.
before you start, might I recommend that we take a 5-minute pause to
Sure.
allow for people to refresh themselves. We're getting ready to dig into some pretty meaty information, and I believe that a fresh set of eyes would be great. So
Thank you.
we will return to the conversation at 11:45. I'll give you 7 minutes, 11:45.
Millicent, can you hear me? Okay.
I can hear you, Ed.
Yeah, I just couldn't, yeah.
None of us were talking. We were all muted. So
Oh, okay, all right.
And
Yeah.
you may have been,
you
may have
weren't
been talking
muted.
to somebody else, but we were not, we were intentionally not talking to each
And
other.
so, Ed, I wanted you to know that you weren't muted during the last conversations, even though you're in that room by yourself. I just
Yeah.
thought if you wanted to talk to yourself, you may want to mute yourself in the process.
Get out of here. This is rather personal. I wasn't in my room. I went to the little boy's room, and I was thinking, God, if you heard that.
No, we didn't. All right.
No, it's funny because I kept looking and I was like, well, I can't put it in the chat because there is no chat, right?
Right.
So, and I didn't want to publicize it, but now that we're not officially back, I guess we're going to be as soon as I shut up.
It will be as soon as you.
You know, the one thing that I do with this new system is that I tend to try to keep my mouth closed because you just never know.
All right, folks, we are back. Thank you for the really robust and meaningful conversation that we had for the first half of the meeting. Looking forward to digging into some really good information, products that the team has been working on, as has been mentioned in many instances with members of your staffs. I will also mention that our agenda, as I mentioned at the top of the meeting, was rather aggressive. And based on the amount of time that we've needed to spend talking about the things that we have, we are going to remove the climate program overview and place that at the beginning of the agenda for the next meeting. So I appreciate the effort that Mara Krinke, who is leading that effort right now, has put into preparing a presentation. Hi, Mara. But we both recognize that in order to ensure that we give all of the topics the due time to discuss thoroughly and not just get presentations and then walk away and not have the opportunity to talk about them, we needed to make the adjustment. So that said, I am going to turn it over to John, who is going to have a conversation with you about the transit investments that the team has been evaluating as we work through this process. Oh, one more thing, John, before you start, I just wanted to mention, and this is kind of in reference to the comment that Commissioner Hardesty made about not being able to see the people. If you look at the top right-hand corner of your screen, you have a button that says View, and you can change the view. It's either standard side-by-side speaker or side-by-side gallery. If you click on side-by-side gallery, you'll be able to see participants in the meeting as well as the slides. And then if you go to the side of the slide, there's a little slide bar, and you move it either to the left or to the right, and it makes the slides bigger and the people smaller, or the people bigger and the slides smaller. So those are the options that you have to support your own personal opportunities to view both the people and the presentation at the same time. So with that, John.
Thank you very much, Millicent. I am going to jump into the review of the representative transit investments. For those of you that are looking for the detailed data, we have that with that we've developed with your staff. I mentioned TOTS earlier. That's our acronym for the Transit Options Technical Sessions. This presentation is intended to provide an overview of, if you go to the next slide, I actually can talk about what we're going to talk about. We're going to provide an overview of the process to date. The real meat of this presentation are the draft findings from the transit measures. And finally, next steps for transit. And again, this is part of our 1-2 approach of getting information in front of you and then touching this group again with a second piece of that information in a conversation that hopefully leads us to a progressive set of decisions as we get to the locally preferred alternative. So I'll go ahead and get started. I'm also doing this presentation instead of Kelly Betteridge, who would be making this presentation. She is our transit planner extraordinaire. So I will do my best impression of Kelly, but if I don't know, I will also let you know and make sure we find an approach to get information to either an individual or to this group separately. So I'll start with that caveat. Next slide, please. So we took a look at transit investments. And again, as Administrator Johnson mentioned, the we is the IBR program along with our partner agencies, not just the transit agencies, but all of the partner agencies who have a hand in helping us determine what we make investments on. So a quick overview of those options. We brought you a partial list in October of these options, 11 build options and 1 no build option, 1 bus on shoulder, 3 bus rapid transit, 6 light rail transit, and 1 hybrid, which was a combination of light rail transit and bus rapid transit that met on Hayden Island. Since we spoke to you with this initial list of options, 2 additional options were added. Option L, which you can see at the end of the list, and option M, that added a look at how a transit investment would perform with a station at waterfront, as well as a terminus near McLaughlin and I-5, and a terminus on option M near Evergreen and I-5. This allowed us to look at the whole range of investments and see how they perform with a lot of data from the modeling that our team did in partnership with both MPOs. Let's go to the next slide, and I'll look to you, Millicent, to see if there are questions as we go through this. I'm not intending to go fast, but just to keep time here. So how did we measure these investments? The IBR team developed 16 measures with project partners in order to better understand how the representative investments would perform relative to each other. So an overview of those included the big category of ridership demand. What is the ridership demand for transit? And we looked out to the planning year of 2045. So we looked at river crossings by mode, also ridership by time of day, mode of access, walk, transfer from existing transit, which I'll get to a little bit later, and also park and ride access. In fact, all of these modes of access we'll talk about a little bit later. We also looked at access, excuse me, for equity priority communities, and got good information from our EAG as well as from our partners on how to conduct that analysis to really understand the differences between the options. We looked at relative costs at this level. So those that are looking at cost, we are looking at relative capital costs as well as operations and maintenance costs for each of the investment options. We also have high-level potential impacts, not to be confused with the detailed impact analysis that will happen during the NEPA phase, the National Environmental Policy Act phase, but rather high-level impacts to help us understand which options we do take or which investment we do take into that phase to do a deeper testing on. I'll pause again. Okay, next slide. So as has been the thread in our previous conversation about how we're taking a look at the project and getting it into the NEPA process, we have looked at what has changed since 2013 for transit. Most of that change we are responding to has happened north of the river, but this is not an exhaustive list. There are changes both in context and operations of transit on both sides of the river, but these are the most pertinent and the ones that really influenced our evaluation. For starters, C-Tran has done a fantastic job of developing and implementing the Vine BRT network. The City of Vancouver has worked with C-Tran to design robust station environments for the Vine system on Broadway and Washington in the Central Business District, Vancouver Central Business District. And the city, Vancouver, has also seen substantial growth in the waterfront district as planned for the waterfront development plan. Reminding us back a couple slides ago that we've added a look at how some improvements would perform with waterfront connections. And finally, the population of the region is growing and diversifying. In 2010, the most notable change was Clark County, Clark County's portion of the region, where their population grew by nearly 78,000, of which 76% of those people were people of color. So recognizing that demographic shift as we looked at transit investments and specifically equity priority communities. I'll pause. Okay, as we get into the draft findings, here is what our team has found out. And again, this is an overview that we can then touch base with this group again. The draft findings are as such. all of the build options that we compared to the no build substantially improved transit service. And there is, again, the use of the word substantial. There is substantial demand for cross-river transit service. And that's probably not a surprise to those of you that have been, that understand our region, how it functions and the modeling, but it's really important to note there is substantial demand for cross-river transit service and a reinforcement of the idea that we've included high capacity transit in this project. Capacity, so we have demand and we have capacity, both at the transit investment level and at the system level is an important consideration for selecting our locally preferred alternative. As we look at capacity outside of just the bridge and the crossing, we have to look for light rail at downtown Vancouver. Down in Oregon, we have to look at Interstate Avenue and how it performs. Rose Quarter and Steel Bridge, these are all points of operation that need to be evaluated, as well as the Portland Transit Mall. For bus rapid transit, we need to, of course, understand how that operates in downtown Vancouver to evaluate the investments. And also with Express Bus, the Express Bus that we're looking at between downtown Vancouver and the Portland Transit Mall is also an important consideration to understanding capacity. That a transit investment that serves these identified markets and attempts to serve demand will need to include a combination of Vine BRT, light rail transit, and express bus. We don't meet the demand with just one mode. We have to look at the entire system. This is really key. Transfers from other transit vehicles are the highest mode of access for all representative transit investments. This highlights the importance of conveniently connecting to both CTRAN and TriMet system. Really exciting actually to see the regional planning and implementation efforts for transit have actually enabled this to be our highest mode of connection. Means our systems are working, and when we put high capacity transit investment across the river, it actually achieves that by making those connections meaningful. Also, when comparing the same representative alignments, LRT options have higher ridership than BRT options. So when we look at an alignment that has similar termini, and all of our high capacity transit options have a termini in the south at Expo Center. But when we look at representative comparatives, the light rail has higher ridership than the bus rapid transit. And I'm going to pause. We have 2 pages of learning, and I just want to see if there are questions or clarifications our team can provide to help you understand what we've learned.
Commissioner Hardesty.
First, let me say thank you for the presentation, John. Really good information. I have a question about park and ride sites. You alluded that they were like really cool and people needed to have them for public transit. Would you speak more to that? Because I was just saying,
yes.
Outside of the river, that is, our park and ride lots are empty all the time.
Yeah, I didn't mean to imply they were cool. Park and ride lots are part of a consideration of how you will get riders to transit. I think we do have some of our what we've learned does relate to park and ride on the next slide. What I was recognizing is that transferring from other transit vehicles instead of park and rides, when I talked about that second to the last bullet, is notable in our evaluation.
I agree with that. Yeah, I saw that, but I think the last slide, it says something about, the park and rides were like preferred or something. And I just wanted to double check that because, I think we lose a lot of space on our side of the river with park and rides.
Absolutely. And I think it's best to say that if you can build a transit system without building park and rides, that is a big success. Park and rides are a way to drive ridership, and we could talk for days probably about park and rides. We do, I think, mention it on the second slide. I will say that we recognize they may not be the right solution in every area. I will definitely hold that thought. And if we don't answer your park and ride question, I do want to make sure we go back to that. Okay, thank you. Let's go to the next slide unless there's other questions. I don't see any hands. Oh, here we go. We probably, and I guess also as the staff and the staff in your agencies, we always try very hard not to make statements of endorsement for one particular option over another. It's always, we're trying to bring just the facts. So if you see that, we always have an opportunity to correct that, especially in a public meeting like this one. But what we did learn is that park and ride demand is robust in all representative transit scenarios. So while it's not the highest level of transfer to the transit options we're looking at, it's still robust, with the greatest demand attributed to those that provide the most convenient access from I-5. So I-5 represents a pretty large travel shed. So a park and ride next to I-5 would generate ridership for some of the options we're looking for. And we do have our partners here that probably know a lot more about transit than I do. So if any of them want to chime in, feel free. The next bullet there, investments that include more stations, serve more residents within the walking distance, including BIPOC and low-income populations. So this is maybe obvious, but the longer your length of transit and the more stations, the more riders you're going to get, and the more BIPOC and low-income populations. So that's a learning that we learned on this, looking at these investments. Next, all transit investments improve access to jobs, including BIPOC and low-income transit populations. So that's recognized. The light rail transit investments improve access to jobs to a greater degree than bus rapid transit investments alone. And finally, when comparing the same representative alignment, this is again, getting as close as we can to doing apples to apples comparison, the light rail transit options have a higher capital cost and a lower operating cost per rider than bus rapid transit investments. So those are the big takeaways. If you want to look at those 16 measures we talked about that we evaluated, that information is available with your staff. We did not make it part of this higher level executive summary presentation.
And John, if I may, I'd like to mention that the slides that were shared with the CAG and EAG were made available to you on Monday. So the full set of slides, but we wanted to make sure that we reflected that we listened to what you said in the last convening and did a higher level overview of the information that we wanted to share.
Thank you, Millicent. Yeah, thanks for clarifying that. Okay, if there are no other questions.
If I may, and this is absolutely has nothing to do with what you just presented, but as I think about building park and rides, I have to think about housing people can afford to live in. So are there opportunities and I know transit agencies only think about transit, right? Because that's what we do. Is there any way to actually just, I don't know, put it in your back pocket? Because again, what I know is this region is becoming so unaffordable for so many working people. If we have an opportunity to add housing people can afford to live in, at the same time we're doing this really cool bridge project, I would hope that we would not just stay so narrowly focused on the bridge and really think about the people who will be utilizing the public transit options that will be nearby. So I just want to put that on the table. And again, great presentation, but I could not let this go by without connecting the two.
We appreciate that. Thank you.
I'm sorry, John. I see our transit partners jumped right in. I think they want to provide both some additional context on the presentation, but some thoughts in general that might address your question. Sean.
Yeah, I would just say I appreciate Commissioner Hardesty's comment on park and rides. I think C-Trans position throughout the entire process has been to try to protect downtown Vancouver and Southwest Washington with a limited amount of park and rides on the peripheral. And from a transit perspective, we certainly understand the benefit that they have. But the one thing that we see that the Portland metropolitan area has certainly gravitated toward is no park and rides within the downtown corridor. And I think that the city of Vancouver, and I don't want to speak for the city, but as a transit representative of Southwest Washington, we see that responsibility to be carried over as well. So we definitely had some concerns when we saw some of the models that existed that either took space, very dedicated space away from community colleges or potential displacement of houses. And I think when we start to narrow down some of those options, C-Tran has sort of picked out an area that we believe is the best location to provide good public transit transfers and really holds down any displacement and also discourages potential gentrification in the future as a function of public projects. And so I think when we just talk about ridership or numbers specifically that are generated out of potential park and rides, which could potentially be argued as a way for not necessarily jobs that would be focused on in transit to be able to get connected to. I think that's a very serious conversation that we all have had in real time. And I know that's been a huge conversation between the transit agencies. So I definitely appreciate the work that TriMet and our folks at C-Tran have put into that. But I appreciated those comments. And I think we've been along the same lines of how we can score these things with good transit transfers, because we have such a different transit network in Southwest Washington than we did 10 years ago. And there's a really good way for us to be able to find a way to connect those transit agencies together from a transit perspective and not necessarily from the standpoint of building park and rides that will be specific to transit and may not be able to be used by the city or be able to be used by colleges, but also potentially displace opportunities for future growth at college campuses and or houses. So thank you very much. I very much appreciated that comment. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you, CEO Donahue. I'd like to hear from Steve.
I'd actually like to yield to Rebecca Kennedy before I make my comments. Thank you.
Rebecca Kennedy from the City of Vancouver.
Thanks, Steve. Appreciate it. And all of you can probably see I'm not the mayor. She had to leave to go meet with Park Service Director Sam. So she apologizes for leaving early. I appreciate the comments, Commissioner Hardesty, and I appreciate the opening really just to talk about a little bit about the equitable transit investment strategy that the city and C-Tran have been working together on for several years. When we look at making transit investments in the city of Vancouver and with our partners at C-Tran, we ask ourselves, how can we connect people who need it to essential places and spaces where they need to get? And then we say, how can we do this in a way that adds benefit, that doesn't create additional burden, doesn't push people who need transit and the infrastructure we're building away from that infrastructure. And we have a very clearly defined strategy around affordable housing, around workforce access, around small business assistance. We think about both residential and commercial displacement. And these are really, really critical for us, things to look at in terms of long-term equitable transit investment, rather than maybe just like who might be able to reach future jobs. We think very clearly about how can we keep the people who are here now here in 2045 and further so that they can benefit from the investment we're making. So really appreciated your comments and thank you for that.
Thanks, Rebecca. Steve.
I just, in both Rebecca's comments, Sean's comments, and the commissioner's comments, we're talking about a different way of doing these, large scale transit improvements. And I'm happy to say that, well, we haven't gotten it right every time. What I'm happy to say is we've learned a little bit each part of the way. And again, I want to commend the work by the city and C-Tran because they've been ahead of this. They've been ahead of this and waiting to have I think a quality response that really enhances the livability of their community and just doesn't create more traffic somewhere else. I've never said I'm here to get people out of their cars, but building more park and ride, I think just encourages, additional congestion in places that really can't take it. And it's actually a bigger burden on the affordability of folks accessing jobs by having to manage and maintain automobiles. So I think this is a terrific opportunity. I think connecting into the C-Tran network and the things that they've done to increase access to all communities in Clark County is really exciting. And I think FTA is on board with seeing us try this a different way. So thank you.
Thank you, Steve. I'd like to hear from Brendan and then Secretary Millar.
Thanks, Melissa. Real quickly, Commissioner Hardesty, to your point, there's a good example, a good model. If you look at interstate light rails, in particular around that Skidmore station, TriMet partnered with the city of Portland, the Portland Housing Bureau, to do some affordable housing projects there as part of that whole project. A good model to look at. I know that's something that Secretary Millar is interested as well. So I'll just wanted to point that out. And yeah, I know Mr. Witter was a part of that that agreement.
Thanks, Brendan.
Yeah, as someone whose agency is responsible for a lot of park and rides around the state, I think their time has come and gone. You know, a park and ride at the end of the line is one thing, but Sean and his team at CTRAN over the last several years have developed a transit network that serves the region. And so the end of the light rail line or the end of the BR is not the end of the line anymore. It's a transfer point. And most of the people that are going to use this system are going to get to the system by walking, by biking, or by taking the bus. And we need to design a system for that. To put a park and ride at the station is going to attract hundreds of cars to that space during the peak hour, which congests the facility and congests the roads around it. It also creates a safety problem because people are walking and biking and taking the bus to that space at the same time all those people are driving in and out. And the other thing we're finding, and this is with my Sound Transit Board hat on, parking ride spaces, the structured parking is upwards of $200,000 a space these days. And that money invested in affordable housing, rather than 200 places or 500 places to store a car that comes in the morning, sits all day and drives home, why not make that investment to house a family and create transit ridership that way and create community that way? I think that's what we need to be thinking about going forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This has been a really good conversation. I'm excited to continue it. I know that the team is spending a lot of time thinking about any number of components to solving the problem that we see potentially developing in front of us, and really working together with partners across the region to stitch together a meaningful solution, a sustainable solution. So really pleased that we all appear to be moving in that same direction as relates to thinking creatively about how to ensure that we're both providing access and movement and the opportunity for people to live close to those spaces that would allow them to move most capably and comfortably around the region to access jobs, to access shopping, to access schools, to access the things that are important to them. So really appreciate everyone for joining into the conversation and providing your insights. So John, did you have any closing statements?
There's one more slide, but you really covered it, Millicent. And the next steps, we will come back to this group to talk about winnowing, if you will. How do we take a look at where we make the investments in transit to achieve the goals we're looking for? So I really appreciated this discussion, and this is the kind of feedback we're looking for from this group. And I thought the Park and Ride discussion was excellent. So I will close there and turn it over so we can talk about some more data for this group. Thank you.
Thanks so much, John. So now we're going to transition and have a conversation with our CAG co-chairs, Lynn Ballanter and Ed Washington. They mentioned in the opening that there were a couple of meetings that have happened over the past several months with the CAG members. And so we're going to talk today a little bit about some of the conversation that happened at the CAG and how we want to use that information to inform our next steps as a program. So Lynn and Ed.
Yes, this is Ed. Can you get the slides up for me and can you hear me?
We can hear you and the slides are up.
Okay, because let me just take a sec. Right at the very moment here, I got a notice on my computer that it was going to go dead because I'm not
battery,
at home. Yeah, but I had it plugged in. At any rate, for those of you, this has been a very interesting conversation today. I've enjoyed it. A lot of wonderful opportunities, long ways to go. But the CAG's role in the modified LPA, the CAG will provide input and feedback on 3 major components of the draft modified LPA. And what we'll be looking at is transit mode, Hayden Island / Marine Drive interchanges, and then the number of auxiliary lanes. And on April 28th, the CAG will see the program's recommendations of the draft modified LPA and how their feedback and values and priorities have been incorporated. And I want to say this, that the CAG truly understands that the draft modified LPA is a starting point for more specific decisions and recommendations in the future. And, you know, when you bring that many citizens into the fold, they don't have the time that we all have. And I'm sure with all of you, your plates are probably running over. And but they are very interested in making sure that they are a part of this process. And I'm going to ask Lynn, turn it over to her, so let her give you some words, and then we will come back and you can talk to the two of us. Lynn?
Thank you. So next slide, please. So we've had 2 meetings, I think, since the last ESG. And so at meeting 1, if I may, it was just a fire hose of information. We got all kinds of information. We hadn't seen much. If you recall, we had canceled, I think, 2 meetings because the team was developing information. So at the first of the 2 meetings, we just got a whole bunch of very good, very rich, but a lot of information. And so then our second meeting was a chance for people to react to that. We broke into small groups. So just to capture it, we were presented with a very high level overview of the transit screening process. It started with 11 options, the same ones that ESG is familiar with. It grew to 13 options with an emphasis on what has changed since 2013, the LPA and the draft findings. And so at our April 14th meeting, we're going to be weighing in on the options, the mode, and the alignment. And this is balanced against our stated values and priorities, which conveniently is the next slide, if I can ask you to forward it. I want to remind this group, this is no different than the message that we've heard all along, but CAG really does replicate the community at large. And so when we survey CAG and survey the community, frankly, the outcomes are startlingly aligned. And so that also says that the work in standing CAG up and in representatives really does represent the community at large. I would just emphasize that within our values and priorities as surveyed, these are prioritized. And so the bulk of the time that we spent really underlined the first 2 bullets, if I may, the modes of transportation, all modes of transportation, which is aligned with the last one on that column as well. And then that's coupled with congestion relief. So we want to see congestion relief, but we want to see it via all modes, not just one mode. I would also just call out bi-state cooperation was raised multiple times. And if I may, I think that's reflective of the fact that there is some legacy insight from the previous effort, and we're getting closer to deliverables. And so CAG wants to continue to see bi-state cooperation. So I think that if you can pull the slides down again, I can only see the interpreter, and I'll change my view here. But we would also be happy to answer any questions. The CAG is standing up, but to Ed's point, we're not in this day to day. we don't have staff that provides us with insight and representation and, kind of continuity. And so we get the information. The group has been remarkably motivated and engaged in processing that information and in providing meaningful feedback. But I would also say that we're looking for data too. We want specific data on how long does it take people to get in from a point in Clark County to a job, right? The things that all of us have echoed here. And I would also just say personally, it's really wonderful to hear us talking about how transportation and housing can help elevate our communities. I think historically everyone was trying hard, but in more of a siloed manner. And with centering equity, it feels like this has allowed all of our agencies to pull together toward common goals in a way that hopefully does in fact set a standard for projects like this going forward. That concludes my remarks. Are there questions, comments?
Yes, we have a comment or a question from Commissioner Hardesty.
First, I just want to thank you so much, Ed Washington and Lynn Valater. Is that right?
Yes.
Valater? Good, good. I tell you, it looks little and little in that little box where you're trying to read people's last names. Thank you both for that presentation. And thank you for your honesty, right? Because what I'm hearing from you is, I hope, a message that everybody else is hearing as well. I feel like we're all saying the same thing about the need to have more information, to actually have more opportunity to review it, to get more opportunity to be grounded in the options that we have, right? I think the worst scenario for the I-5 bridge is to be so narrowly focused that we lose sight of opportunities that we have in this environment that we're in. And I was thrilled to hear the transit folks actually speak so passionately about housing and the interconnectedness to housing, because I mean, the cost of living in the Portland metro area today for a family of four is $96,900. Most workers are not making anywhere close to that money. And so when people have limited options, I hope that we are really thinking about how those community members are going to benefit, because, I can't point to one project yet that actually the low-income people and people of color, those most impacted, have been the primary beneficiaries of. And I just want to make sure that as we're moving, that we're thinking creatively, and we're not stuck in the old Federal Transit Administration mindset. Because everything I hear from the new one is that they're talking a new game. And I hear from us a lot that we're thinking, nope, this is the cookie cutter that we have to use because it's a federal process. And again, I want to encourage us to be bold and brave and actually push the envelope, because we can't have a federal transportation administrator saying one thing and then have us behind closed doors doing a status quo project. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Hardesty. Matt, Ransom?
Yeah, just a broad observation, and I welcome just any reinforcement of this if it's fair to characterize it this way. So we're all here with boundaries related to us, right? Political boundaries, geographic boundaries, et cetera, and that's okay for our purpose. But I heard in this from the CAG level, that doesn't matter. They're interested in regional outcomes. They're interested in things that just make sense from their life and, commutes and social activities that they pursue. And while that's not an important observation, I think it's just a helpful reminder. I think in my role, I think about my constituents, but there's this zoom out also, which is, well, really at the end of the day, the constituents are just all of us, regardless of political boundary, right? What's the system we're putting together? Does it make sense? I resonate very clearly with this, like those top two, as you noted, multimodal transportation system, and give me some performance benefit. I know the statement is congestion relief. I'm going to flip it for policy wonk purposes, performance benefit for walking, biking, transit, roadway, freight, et cetera, et cetera. So it's helpful to hear this. And I think it just is a good reminder for me. And I'll happily take that to the RTC board table. I think it's important to keep that in context. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Well, we really do appreciate the presentation from you, Lynn and Ed, and the conversations that I know that you're having with community members and with the team to ensure that we're hearing the true reflection of what the community has as interests. I see your hand is raised, Ed.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm sorry, my machine is not showing my hand raised, and I'm glad you saw it. But let me just say one thing. Commissioner Hardesty, I appreciate your comments. I appreciate everybody's comments. And let me just say this on sort of in concert with the CAG and all those members. You know, me speaking personally, I'm very fortunate. I've had the opportunity to serve on the Metro Council. And so I know where I get it. I really do. Most of the people on the CAG have never had that opportunity, okay? But let me tell you this about the members of the CAG, and I'll close on this, and I'm going to be disappearing after I say this, not because I don't want to stay, but I'm at a conference in New Orleans, and I have to go because my boss is probably expecting me downstairs before long. But let me just tell you this about the CAG, and I would hope that all of you would keep this in your minds and your heads as you're going through this process. The members of the CAG thoroughly understand where the cows eat the cabbages, okay? And just remember that, please. And if you know that they understand the field that the cows are in, I'm not calling anybody a cow, so don't think that. But we all know about cabbages in the field. So just remember that about the CAG. You know, they're giving a lot of time and input. And let's not forget that. And I have no idea that you all are going to forget that. I appreciate it. So thank you so very, very much. And I'm going to scoot out of here now. And
well, thank you.
Have a great rest of the day in Portland.
Thank you for your contributions. Thank you for those final words and that reminder. It is important for us to be mindful. I see your hand, Commissioner Hardesty, and then I want to ask a question about the next item on the agenda, given that we only have a few more minutes left and a pretty weighty topic. So go ahead, Commissioner Hardesty.
I just had a quick question. I thought I heard Lynn say that the list of values and priorities were going to be reduced to 3. Did I know? Okay, I just heard that in my mind. So everything that's listed on your slide are all the values we're carrying into this process.
Yeah, I highlighted 3. So you heard something I said.
All right.
Potentially not every word.
Right. Well, I wanted to make sure. I wanted to know which 3 were the ones we were keeping, right? Thank you. I appreciate that clarification. And yeah, my ears don't work as well sometimes. So I wanted to double check. Didn't want to assume I heard right. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the clarifying question and for the clarifying answer. And again, we want to thank the CAG co-chairs for their work, both on the ESG and with the committee that they're chairing. The conversations have been robust and meaningful. And if you have the opportunity, I would encourage you to go onto the YouTube site and review the meeting that they've had, the meetings that they've had, where the team actually had the opportunity to dig into the information and have conversations about their sentiments regarding especially transit, but there were several other topics that were discussed. But we will have opportunities to discuss that in the future. So I have a question for you. We have 30 minutes left in this meeting. We are proposing that we would have the presentation from our technical team, a 3-part presentation that they may be able to squeeze into a very short period of time, but I recognize that there's likely the desire to have some conversation about the presentation. And so we have 2 options as I view it, and perhaps more. We can receive the presentation and limit the amount of time that we talk about it and bring the presentation back to the next ESG meeting with any additional technical insights that they'll be able to share at that time. So give them about 10 minutes to present and 10 minutes for Q&A, because we do need to make sure we leave time for public comment, or we can move on to public comment and then cut the meeting short and not have the technical overview. But I really do think it's important for us to get the information out there. That is my opinion. And that is my hope, that we could at least present and then hold questions if we have them until the next meeting. But I'm open to hearing what folks have as their opinions for the next minute or so. Commissioner Hardesty.
Thank you. I would recommend, as I look around who's left at this meeting, this is a really important topic. So my preference would be that we take public comment and leave a little early if that's possible for us. And we have the material. And I think it's going to be a very robust conversation. And so I don't want to short shift this important dialogue.
Thank you, Commissioner Hardesty. Are there any other thoughts? You all agree with that? I'm seeing thumbs up and head nods. That sounds good. All right. So we're setting ourselves up for another really meaty discussion at our next ESG. I know that it's only scheduled for 2 hours. We might have to come back to you and ask you for another hour, but we'll see. We're going to figure it out. You know, the important thing is that we make sure that we continue to keep the information flowing, that you have the opportunity to review, and that we have the opportunity to discuss. So given that I've been given your direction to move the transit presentation to our next ESG meeting, we are going to move into public comment. Can we get those slides up so that I can read the instructions for the good of the order? So if you have a verbal comment that you'd like to make, if you've joined by Zoom, you click the raise hand button. If you've joined by phone, press *9 to raise your hand. The facilitator will call on participants. You will receive an unmute request. Please accept it. If you're commenting by phone, dial *6 to unmute. Please provide your name and affiliation, and attendees will be allocated up to 2 minutes for public comment, depending on the number of commenters, up to a total of 10 minutes. If we run out of time and you have not had the chance to speak, you can still provide comment after the meeting. To submit comment after the meeting, you fill out the comment form on the program website or email comments to info@interstatebridge.org with ESG Public Comment in the subject line, or you can call 888-503-6735 and state ESG Public Comment in your message. All written comments must be received prior to 48 hours in advance of each upcoming meeting in order to be distributed to ESG members. Comments received after that point will be distributed to members in advance of their next meeting. All comments are posted on the IBR website. And I'm sorry for speaking so fast. I recognize that the ASL interpreters are trying to catch all the words that we're saying. Thank you.
And Millicent, it looks like we have one person signed up for public comment right now. It looks like it's Bob. So Bob, we're going to allow you to talk now to provide your public comment.
Mr. Ortblad?
Yes, I'm here. I'm Bob Ortblad, a Washington resident and 40 years a civil engineer. I have submitted, for this meeting, I've submitted over a dozen public comments on why a high bridge is really a bad solution and why an immersed tunnel is the best solution. Unfortunately, the IBR has rejected an immersed tunnel based on a misleading assessment. Please study my comments. Let me read part of my most important comment. An investigation by the Department of Transportation, Office of Inspector General of the IRB's tunnel concept assessment would reveal several false claims. This could delay or cancel federal funding from the Federal Highway Administration and Federal Transit Administration. I suggest the IBR retract this misleading report on the immersed tunnel, and an independent engineering firm, competent, review this option. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ortblatt. No additional comments, Brent?
Looks like we have one more additional comment. John
Lay.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. John Lee, Southwest
Lee.
Washington. I am eager to see the data that follows the discussion that there is significant demand for transit. Perspective, as always, is totally appropriate. The Oregon Transportation Commissioner, Van Brockland, said that overall, only 4% of people in Oregon use transit. And so in the Portland area, we know that is higher, but in a macro sense, if transit ridership were to double from 5% to 10%, that's significant. However, that doesn't handle the traffic congestion problem. And that's overwhelmingly what the people want. We learned before the pandemic from the PENCO survey that 94% of the people wanted to use their privately owned vehicles. And therefore, after the pandemic, more people used their private vehicles and avoided transit ridership. TriMet has said it was going to take 6 years for their transit ridership to return to pre-pandemic levels. At the end of the day, we are looking at 400,000 to 500,000 vehicles on the I-5 corridor. How are we going to accommodate that demand for vehicles and traffic congestion? How can we accommodate that many people on transit? I don't think it's physically possible because light rail and buses can only carry so many people on a corridor that has 3 through lanes, north and south. So the people want traffic congestion relief. We would love to see the data on transit ridership and everything you're doing. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Are there any additional comments, Brent?
We are not seeing anyone else signed up.
All righty then. Well, given that we won't have any additional presentations, we are going to quickly review what we intend to make sure that we're providing for the team as we follow up with you in the future. So what we've acknowledged is that, or what we recorded is that there is concern about the timeline. And so we are going to continue to work to provide each of you as much information as you need to ensure that you have a level of comfort as we continue to advance the program and the decision-making on the program. We are going to make sure that we provide for you additional insights about what the steps are that we need to consider and what getting to an LPA means versus moving into the environmental overview or environmental study means. And so there are some opportunities for us to provide more insight, more information, greater clarity. And so we will work to do that. We recognize that there's a desire to have greater clarity on the tolling administration topic that was discussed. And so our partnering organizations do intend to make sure that we're working as a program to provide the information to the full ESG about how that decision was made and what that decision will mean as we move forward. We did hear the conversation on Park and Ride and recognize that we have some opportunities to better amplify how we're considering it in the program, or not considering, as it were, and also land use as a component of this program. what that will look like, especially as it relates to affordable housing. We know that some of that study has been done preliminarily, but there is a great deal more work that needs to be done. Not to suggest that all of it will be able to happen in advance of us making a decision on an LPA, but we can certainly provide greater clarity and insight about how that those inputs will help to inform an ongoing decision. There are a number of other notes that the team has taken. We will be providing the follow-up per those specific requests that were made. We know that we have the opportunities for additional conversations, and we will have those. You have received an agenda, a request, calendar request, an invitation for a meeting on April 7th, an ESG meeting on April 7th, and we will also have one on April 21st. The agenda for April 7th will change a little bit because the meeting's agenda for today changed a bit. So there will be two presentations that you don't see listed on the April 7th agenda as a part of the agenda for next time. And that will be the the technical overview as well as the climate, and then the items that you see listed there. So you'll see as a third bullet, a April 29th proposed meeting. That is a proposal based on the need to ensure that we're getting the review time in for the modified LPA before we start going to boards and commissions. Again, working to determine if that's even feasible. And I did hear you, Commissioner Hardesty, and I did hear many others indicate that schedules are challenging. And so we appreciate that that is a challenge. And so we are going to work to try to find the ways that we can best engage and resolve questions and concerns as we move forward. If there are no other comments or questions, yes, Commissioner.
Thank you. Let me just really appreciate you, Millicent. You know, when the conversations are hot and heavy, you are cool and calm, and you keep us on track, and I'm very appreciative of you. I want to just say, just for myself personally, I would be willing to meet on a Saturday if that would work, so that we had the time to have the real conversations that we need to have, right? I want this to be the best bridge project that anybody's ever created. And with all the stipulations that I've said, time, right, budget time, everybody's busy. If we need to have our next two meetings be 3-hour meetings, I will commit to a 3-hour meeting in order to make that happen. Well, once we get a schedule. So I'm just encouraging you to be flexible. You know, I'm a community organizer, so I'm not used to having all my meetings between 9 and 5. So I am okay with evening meetings and Saturday meetings. And so we may have to do that if in fact we're going to reach the timelines that folks have proposed, and we are going to have enough information to make good decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Hardesty. Do we have any other comments before I turn it over to Program Administrator Johnson? Thank you all for your time and attention today. It's been a good conversation. Looking forward to many more of these. And now back to you, Greg.
Thank you, Millicent. And I would just want to thank everybody. These are discussions that are getting, once again, closer to getting us to that next step in the program. And I recognize these are tough conversations, but they are necessary conversations. So we will continue talking to the staff members and to your leadership of your organizations through the staff level group, the SLG, and the program management group. But anytime you want to have discussions with myself or with my team on an individual basis to understand anything that we are doing, you know, I heard the word transparency used. We are trying to operate in the most transparent way to move this thing forward. So anytime you want to have those discussions, we will make ourselves available for that conversation to you or your boards or councils. We're trying to hew to getting this thing done This is a conversation in this region that has been going on for 25 years. And eventually, we've got to land this plane. And we have a window of opportunity of funding and of need that are aligning. So the reason you guys brought me here is to make sure that we can fit ourselves into that window. So that is what I'm trying to do without causing offense to anyone, but to make sure that we are keeping a program moving forward, answering all questions and doing it in a very transparent way. So with that, I thank you for your participation. More meetings coming up that we will try and get scheduled on everyone's calendar to once again get us to a reasonable and logical next step. So thank you again.
Thank you,